When the first message arrived from deep space, most people on Earth didn't believe it was real. It was only a short signal, a soft repeating pulse that didn't match any known star or object. At first, scientists thought it might be a mistake in one of the new satellites. But the pulse kept returning, steady and intentional. Bit by bit, as more observatories confirmed it, the truth settled over the world like a quiet sunrise. Humanity was not alone. Governments held emergency meetings. News channels ran non-stop debates. Some people celebrated, others panicked, and most simply waited. Something about the signal felt calm, almost polite, as if whoever sent it was knocking on a door and patiently waiting for someone to answer. When the reply finally came, it was no longer a distant pulse. It was a clear message translated through patterns of math and sound. The visitors called themselves the Ithari Concord, a coalition of many species living together among the stars. They said they wanted peaceful contact, trade, and friendship. They praised humanity for reaching radio technology and spaceflight on its own. They said Earth had potential. For the first time in history, the world united behind one goal, welcoming someone from beyond the sky. Almost every nation sent representatives to a global council. Scientists worked around the clock to decode the Ithari language and prepare a response. Artists created symbols to represent Earth. Even children drew pictures of what they thought aliens might look like. There were arguments, of course, but something amazing happened. People listened to each other. For months, there was no talk of war or competition. Everything felt strangely hopeful. Then came the day the Concorde arrived. Their ships entered the solar system slowly, without hiding or rushing. They moved with a calm confidence, as if they had traveled this way 1,000 times. The largest ship took position above Earth, glowing like a silver moon. Cameras on satellites showed smooth surfaces with no visible weapons. No sharp angles, just curved lines that almost looked like seashells. The Concorde sent another message. They congratulated humanity for responding wisely, and they requested a peaceful landing in orbit. The world watched together as the ship settled into a stable position above the equator. Inside control rooms, hundreds of scientists cried from joy or disbelief. A small shuttle detached from the main ship and drifted toward Earth. When it reached low orbit, it shared its interior image. Many expected frightening creatures or huge armored beings. Instead, the Ithari looked calm and gentle. They were tall, with soft features and smooth, pale skin. Their movements were careful, almost shy. They reminded some people of graceful underwater beings. The first official meeting took place on a floating platform built just for the occasion. The platform hovered above the ocean, halfway between continents, so no country could claim advantage. Representatives from around the world arrived by air. The shuttle landed silently, and the Ithari stepped out for the first time. Everyone held their breath. The lead Ithari bowed slightly. A gesture, they explained, was a sign of respect. When the humans mirrored the bow, the Ithari responded with a soft hum, a sound their translators identified as approval. That moment traveled around the world within seconds. Billions watched from homes, offices, and streets. People felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Humanity had welcomed visitors from the stars not with fear, but with dignity. The first discussions went better than expected. The Ithari shared knowledge about distant stars, medicine, and peaceful conflict resolution. They praised humans for creativity, curiosity, and resilience. They admitted they were cautious at first, because many species they had visited before reacted with fear. But Earth had shown patience and openness. Some people started calling the Ithari the calm ones. Others made short documentaries comparing their arrival to humanity's first steps on the Astia moon. Schools included the event in their lessons. Social media filled with artwork of humans and Ithari shaking hands, The Concord offered to help Earth improve its environmental systems and energy production. In return, they asked for cultural exchange, songs, stories, history, and scientific cooperation. They said Earth had a unique way of thinking, something they wanted to understand better. They didn't explain what that meant, but humans took it as a compliment. Although people celebrated, a few observers felt something they couldn't quite describe. The Concord representatives were warm, but also slightly distant. Their smiles felt practiced, almost studied. They acted as if they had seen this many times before. But most humans ignored these doubts. After all, the Ithari had not shown any hostility. They had arrived gently, and that counted for a lot. Over the next months, joint research centers were built. Mixed teams worked on agriculture, clean water, and space travel. The Ithari provided devices that improved communication and allowed instant translation. Humans were amazed at how advanced Ithari technology, with smooth surfaces, no visible buttons, and systems that responded to touch and voice with perfect accuracy. Earth felt like it was entering a golden age. And yet, small things began to feel unusual. Some Ithari scientists took great interest in human behavior. Not just big things like governments or culture, but tiny everyday actions, how families ate meals together, how strangers helped each other during storms, how humans argued passionately but then found compromise. They recorded everything, sometimes quietly, sometimes openly. They never explained why they were so fascinated, and humans assumed it was harmless curiosity. A few engineers noticed that the Concord kept tight control over the technology they shared. The devices were helpful, but no one was allowed to see how they were built inside. Whenever human specialists asked for training to operate certain systems, the Ithari politely declined, saying it was too complex or dangerous. This puzzled some people, but again, the global excitement drowned out most concern. Earth's leaders scheduled a grand event to officially welcome Earth into the Concord's interstellar community. A year earlier, such a dream would have sounded impossible. Now, it felt like a natural next step. The ceremony would take place in orbit, on a new station built with both human and Ithari materials. Representatives from every continent prepared speeches and cultural performances. Billions planned to watch the broadcast. Humanity wanted to show its best side: unity, kindness, creativity. Just a week before the ceremony, the Concord made a surprising announcement. They wished to establish protective stations around Earth to ensure safety from potential threats in the galaxy. They explained that other species might not be as peaceful as the Ithari, and Earth needed shielding. Some human leaders hesitated. Placing protective platforms in orbit so quickly felt rushed. But the Concord spoke softly, reassuring everyone that Earth's safety mattered to them. After long debates, Earth agreed on the condition that humans could help monitor the platforms. Not the Concord accepted the condition, but something in their tone felt rehearsed, not genuine. As construction began, many ordinary people didn't know what to think. The Concord seemed kind, gracious, wise. Why would they hide anything? Why worry when every action so far had been peaceful? Even the scientists who doubted earlier began to relax. The Concord never showed aggression. They always used gentle language. They always talked about building a better future, and Earth wanted to believe. Meanwhile, deep within Concord ships, private discussions took place. The Ithari leaders reviewed their decade-long observations of other planets they had welcomed. They spoke about Earth's resources, its potential, and its strategic location. But when Earth representatives asked casual questions about the Concord's history, the Ithari always changed the topic. Something was missing, something they didn't want to reveal. Still, the humans' trust grew. They opened their cities to alien delegates, invited them to cultural festivals, shared food, music, and art. Children waved at Ithari visitors during parades. People took photos with them in public squares. The world felt lighter, more hopeful, as if a long shadow had finally lifted the night before the big ceremony. The main Concorde ship dimmed its lights, a sign of preparation in their culture. Humans interpreted it as respect for the upcoming event. But inside the ship, the Athari were not preparing a celebration. They were preparing something else entirely. Back on Earth, no one sensed danger. People slept peacefully, excited for the dawn that would mark humanity's entrance into a wider universe. No one imagined that the next day would change everything. No one imagined that trust could become a trap. For now, Earth believed in unity, friendship, and peace. And the Athari smiled gently, saying nothing, watching closely. Quietly. Patiently. The morning of the grand ceremony arrived with a feeling of excitement that wrapped around the whole planet. People woke up early, turned on their screens, and prepared to watch history. Students gathered in school halls. Workers paused their jobs to tune in. Streets were filled with groups staring at giant public displays. Everyone waited to see Earth officially welcomed into the galactic community. Human representatives boarded shuttles to the joint station in orbit. They carried gifts, books, artwork, handcrafted objects to exchange with the Athari. The world looked up at the sky with pride. For once, there were no borders or rival nations. Earth felt like one whole. But in the middle of all this joy, small things began to feel not quite right. Just an hour before the ceremony, communication with several human satellites suddenly cut off. Engineers on Earth thought it was a minor glitch. The Concorde calmly explained it was a simple technical issue and promised to fix it. They spoke so softly, so reassuringly, that the engineers relaxed. They didn't want to believe anything could go wrong on such an important day. The ceremony started on schedule. Cameras streamed the inside of the orbital station. Humans and Athari stood together, smiling for the world. The main Athari representative stepped forward, raising a hand in a graceful gesture. Their voice carried through speakers everywhere, peaceful and smooth. They spoke about unity, about the future, about cooperation. Earth listened closely. Many people felt their hearts warm. The Athari had a way of speaking that made everything feel gentle, almost musical. But then, the tone shifted. In the middle of the speech, the representative paused. The room felt strangely quiet. Even the humans on the station could sense that something had changed. The Athari's expression softened in a way that didn't feel like kindness anymore. It felt like pity. They said one more sentence, and it silenced the entire planet. We will now begin the stabilization process. No one understood what that meant. Not the officials on the station, not the people watching on Earth. But before anyone could ask, the orbit around Earth seemed to shift. The protective stations built by the Concorde in the last few weeks suddenly activated. Bright lights glowed around them, spreading into a web-like pattern. Then communication screens flickered. For a few seconds, all signals dropped. Every news broadcast, every stream, every camera feed went dark. When the images returned, the world realized something was terribly wrong. Every major human defense system satellites, communication grids, orbital platforms was offline. Not damaged, not malfunctioning. Just shut down, quiet, taken over. The Concorde had done it silently, almost gracefully, the same way they did everything. At first, people didn't panic. Many still believed this was part of some protective setup. They waited for an explanation. They trusted the visitors. Why wouldn't they? The Athari had been friendly since the first day, but then the Concorde message arrived, broadcast to the entire world with calm clarity. They announced that Earth was being placed under temporary supervision. They said humanity was not ready for full membership, not mature enough to manage its own affairs in the galaxy. They insisted they were not invading, only offering guidance, until humanity could become stable. The message was polite. Too polite. It was the kind of politeness that spoke from power. In cities around the world, screens displayed the Concorde emblem, while translations repeated the same message over and over. People stared in disbelief. Some refused to accept it. Some shouted at the screens. Others broke down, unable to understand how the peaceful visitors had changed so quickly. The humans on the orbital station were escorted away by soft-voiced Ithari guards. The representatives protested, but the guards simply responded with the same phrase each time: "For your safety." A strange silence settled over Earth, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like something pressing down from above. Slowly, the truth sank in. Earth had been taken, not with explosions, not with threats, not with force, but with quiet steps, polite words, and a plan humans had never seen coming. Over the next few days, the Concorde began tightening their control. They installed new systems in major cities, tall, smooth towers that glowed with a faint blue light. They called them coordination centers. They claimed the centers would help maintain peace and improve global management. But people noticed something odd. Human officers were not allowed inside. Only Ithari personnel controlled the centers. And whenever a human tried to approach too closely, Ithari guards gently stopped them, always speaking in that same perfect calm. The human governments tried to negotiate. They demanded answers. They asked for their communication satellites back. They asked for their space stations to be returned to their control. The Concorde responded with kindness, but also finality. Earth must adjust. Your world will function better once unnecessary chaos is removed. No one liked the phrase unnecessary chaos. It sounded like a judgment. Human leaders argued more firmly the next day. They insisted Earth was capable of managing its own affairs. They reminded the Concorde that they had come as partners, not rulers. The Ithari only smiled a practiced smile. Your kindness impressed us, they said. But kindness without structure is fragile. We will guide you until you are ready. This time, the smiles did not feel gentle at all. They felt condescending, like an adult scolding a child. Every day, the Concorde expanded their control. They took over major research labs for safety. They restricted access to large airports. They monitored digital communication. They promised they were doing all this to prevent confusion and unrest, but unrest slowly grew anyway. Ordinary people began to whisper in markets, in small shops, in quiet corners of parks. They spoke in low voices, sharing the same question over and over. Were we fooled from the beginning? They remembered the way the Ithari observed everything, how humans talked, how they acted during storms, how they cooperated. They remembered how the visitors always watched, but rarely shared about themselves. How they never let humans touch their core technology. It started making sense. Painfully. They had studied humans not for friendship, but for control. Some people thought about resisting. Some even attempted small protests. But the Concorde responded quickly, not with force, but with warnings. Calm, emotionless warnings. They said protests could disturb harmony, and those involved were taken to counseling centers. No one really knew what happened inside those centers. But those who were sent there did not return right away. When a few eventually came back, they remained unnaturally quiet, avoiding questions. Fear spread quietly through neighborhoods. In the middle of all this, something unexpected happened. Unconnected groups of people around the world began creating small secret networks. Engineers, teachers, students, retired technicians, community members. They came together in hidden basements, back rooms, and empty warehouses. They shared stories, shared doubts, shared information. They compared what they had seen. And the more they shared, the more they realized Earth had been losing control long before the ceremony. The Concorde had been preparing step by step. The networks didn't call themselves rebels. They didn't talk about fighting. They were simply trying to understand what was happening, trying to protect their communities and their families. They kept everything quiet because they learned something important. The Concord sensed fear. They sensed uncertainty, and they used it. 2 weeks after the takeover, the Concord introduced a new rule. All human technology capable of long-range communication had to be inspected and approved by Ithari officers. People protested this online, but the posts were removed within minutes. It became clear the Concord monitored everything, but they underestimated one thing. Humans had always found ways to communicate even under restrictions. They carried their history in their memories, not in networks. They whispered plans. They passed handwritten notes. They used old equipment hidden in garages. And slowly, the underground networks grew stronger. Some members discovered that the Concord coordination centers were built to extract information, not organize peace. They were studying Earth, scanning it, mapping everything. The Ithari kept repeating that it was for safety, but the networks knew better. One evening, a small group of engineers gathered in a dimly lit workshop. They stared at a map of the Concord towers glowing on a screen. They realized the towers formed a complete grid, one that covered the whole planet. It was not a protection network. It was a control grid. Someone whispered, they didn't come for peace. They came because they saw opportunity. No one argued. During this time, the Concord continued acting polite. Their voices were always calm, their gestures always soft. They spoke as if nothing was wrong, as if Earth should feel grateful. That polite tone became more frightening than anger could ever be, because it meant the Concord felt fully in charge. On the surface, Earth still looked peaceful. People still went to work, children still went to school, markets still opened. But something vital had changed under the surface. Trust had been replaced by quiet resistance. The Ithari had taken control of the skies, the networks, and the major systems. But they hadn't taken the most important thing, human spirit. Even in the calmest and most controlled societies, someone always refuses to accept silence. Someone always asks the question no one else wants to ask. Why? Why us? Why now? Why did a peaceful visitor suddenly act like a ruler? Humans didn't have the answers yet. But they knew one thing. They could not depend on the Concord anymore. They had to depend on each other. Late at night, when the streets were quiet and screens dimmed, small groups met in secret rooms lit by a single lamp. They looked at each other with tired eyes and whispered the same truth. The Concord won the first move. But this isn't the end. And somewhere deep inside the main Ithari ship, hidden behind layers of glowing walls, the Concord leaders watched Earth with eyes that held no anger, no hatred, only calculation. They had underestimated humanity once. They would soon learn how dangerous that mistake could be. Would you like Part 3 expanded the same way? 1,500 words? Simple English, emotional, human-centric? In the weeks after the Concord took control, something strange began happening across Earth. The world looked calm on the outside, but inside every city, every town, every quiet corner, people felt a growing pressure in their chest. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the kind of pressure that builds slowly until it becomes part of everyday life. The Concord called it harmonization. Humans called it something else. Watching. Whenever people gathered. In groups larger than 5 or 6, Ithari drones drifted nearby. They floated almost silently, like silver bubbles, shining with soft blue light. The drones didn't speak or warn. They only watched. Their presence was supposed to feel protective, but it made neighborhoods feel like giant waiting rooms where something important was about to happen. Yet no one knew what. Still, the Concord never behaved aggressively. They never shouted, never threatened. They always spoke politely, gently correcting humans who asked too many questions. "Do not worry," they would say. "Everything is under control." But that was the problem. Everything felt too controlled. People tried to go on with their lives. They worked, cooked, traveled, and talked. But the conversations were quieter, the laughter shorter, the eyes more cautious. Humans, by nature, didn't like being monitored, especially when they didn't understand the purpose behind it. As days passed, a pattern became clear. The Concorde's interest wasn't in Earth's resources or land. They barely touched the natural areas. Their interest was humans themselves, their habits, their reactions, their choices. It started with simple questions. In schools, Ithari visitors sat in classrooms and asked students what made them feel safe. In workplaces, they asked workers why humans helped strangers. In homes, they asked families how they solved problems together. They recorded everything, tiny gestures, small pauses, even the way people breathed before answering. At first, people felt flattered. The Ithari seemed curious. But curiosity soon turned into something heavier. One afternoon, an Ithari observer interviewed a group of elders in a community center. The elders spoke warmly about their families, their memories, their struggles. The Ithari listened closely, nodding slowly, humming softly in their usual thoughtful way. But when the elders mentioned how humans protect each other during hard times, the Ithari leaned forward with unusual interest. They asked more questions, not about survival, but about the feeling behind it. Why do humans comfort each other? Why do they smile during crisis? Why do they act brave when they are afraid? The elders grew uneasy, but answered politely. After the interview, the Ithari left with the same calm smile as always. But the humans in the room exchanged troubled looks. They realized something important. The Concorde wasn't studying human weakness. They were studying human strength. Around the world, more and more people noticed this. The Concorde seemed fascinated by the things humans took for granted: emotional bonds, humor, stubbornness, hope. Those were things other species didn't express strongly, at least according to the little the Ithari had shared. To the Concorde, humanity was a strange puzzle, fragile in body, unpredictable in spirit, impossible to categorize. And that made the Concorde nervous. In one coastal town, a group of Concorde researchers set up a small observation post. They said they were studying tides and weather patterns. But people often saw them watching fishermen, how they helped each other pull nets, how they laughed together even after a slow day, how they kept working even when storms were approaching. One evening, 2 fishermen rescued a group of Ithari researchers who slipped on wet rocks. The humans didn't hesitate for even a second. They rushed forward, arms out, steadying them. The Ithari seemed surprised, very surprised, almost startled. They asked, "Why do you help without reward?" The fishermen blinked, confused. One shrugged and said, "Because you needed help." "That's enough." The Ithari wrote something down. They wrote for a very long time. The next day, the observation post closed suddenly. The Concorde said their study was complete. But the villagers whispered that the researchers left not because they finished their work, but because they found something they didn't expect. Not far away, in a crowded city, a different scene played out. A power outage struck a large district late at night. People grabbed flashlights, candles, anything they could find. And instead of panicking, neighbors started checking on each other. Families invited strangers into their homes for warmth. Some people stood on rooftops, signaling directions with lanterns, so others wouldn't trip in the dark. At first light, an Ithari patrol drifted through the streets. They saw people sweeping the roads, sharing breakfast, caring for elderly neighbors. They watched quietly. One of them whispered to another. They remained stable, even without structure. The words worried the humans who overheard. The phrase, "even without structure," sounded like an accusation. Meanwhile, in hidden basements, human resistance networks grew. They were not fighters, just ordinary people trying to understand the situation. They compared notes about the Concorde's behavior. They collected stories like the fisherman, the blackout, the elders in the classroom. Every story pointed to the same truth. The Concorde had expected humans to collapse, but humans did not collapse. They adapted. They supported each other. They made jokes, shared food, fixed broken devices, taught children, planned secretly. It was as if the pressure made humans more united, not less. And that confused the Concorde. One night, in a small apartment hidden behind a mechanic's shop, a group gathered around a dim lamp. They spoke quietly, careful not to draw attention. A young engineer explained something she discovered. The Concorde's technology that monitored human cities wasn't built for enemies. It was built for prediction. The engineer said, "They are trying to predict us. But their models aren't working. We're messing up their calculations." Everyone understood instantly. Human behavior didn't follow simple patterns. Humans could be afraid and brave at the same time. They could be sad and still help others. They could be outnumbered and still refuse to surrender. No formula could capture that. The Concorde didn't know what to do about this unpredictability. And something about that frightened them. Back inside their main ship, the Athari leaders met often. They reviewed recordings from Earth videos of humans repairing homes after storms, families comforting children, people sharing the last bit of food with neighbors. The Athari watched these moments carefully, pausing often, whispering in their own language. One leader said, "They show qualities we have not seen in other species." Another responded, "They fear us, but they do not break. This is dangerous." They continued watching humans, but now with a different expression, less curiosity, more caution. As the days passed, Earth felt like a giant stage where the Concorde observed every action. Humans could sense it, and it made them more determined to stay strong. People walked taller. They spoke kinder. They helped each other more. It wasn't planned. It just happened naturally. One afternoon, in a town square, a group of children drew pictures on the ground using colorful chalk. Some drew stars, some drew animals, some drew smiling faces. A pair of Athari researchers approached them. The children didn't run or hide. Instead, they handed the Athari a piece of chalk. The Athari looked confused. They had never been invited into something so simple, so innocent. But the children insisted. So the Athari knelt and slowly drew a small shape, a star shaped like the emblem of their coalition. The children cheered. They clapped. They said it looked beautiful. The Athari stared at the drawing for a long time. Something about that moment unsettled them deeply. They stood up quickly and left, almost in a hurry. The children didn't understand why, but adults watching nearby noticed the same thing many others had seen. The Concorde seemed uncomfortable when humans showed kindness without expecting anything in return. Meanwhile, the underground networks continued to grow. They didn't want conflict. They didn't want chaos. They only wanted their world back, the freedom to make choices. Even imperfect ones. In old workshops, they built small devices that could hide human communication from Concorde scanners. In abandoned warehouses, they tested old technology that didn't rely on the Concorde systems. In quiet forest cabins, they practiced coded language, using everyday phrases. They were preparing not for a fight, but for the moment when the Concorde's calm mask finally slipped as the weeks turned into a month. The Concorde's behavior slowly changed. Their polite tone became tighter, their smiles thinner. Their questions became sharper. They no longer hid their frustration when humans refused to panic or surrender emotionally. One day, a Concorde representative spoke to a group of human leaders and said something that left everyone uneasy. "You are more resistant than expected." The humans exchanged glances. The representative continued, "Your cooperation is decreasing. If stability falls, corrective measures will be taken." The words corrective measures echoed across the world. People didn't know what the Concord meant, but they knew it wasn't good. Still, even with fear growing quietly, something else grew beside it, determination. That humans had always carried a strange strength inside them. A strength even they didn't fully understand. A strength that came from caring about each other, from refusing to give up, from believing that tomorrow could be better. And now, the Concord had seen that strength up close. They had expected humanity to bend. Instead, humanity stood straighter. In homes, in shops, in factories, in farms, in small hidden rooms, people whispered the same message. We have lost the sky, but we have not lost ourselves. The Concord observed closely, but they still didn't understand. Something very important. Human kindness was real, but so was human resolve. And soon, they would face the other side of humanity, a side they were not prepared for. For a little while, Earth tried to settle into the new reality. People woke up, went to work, and tried to keep life normal. But a quiet question lived in everyone's heart now. How long would this uneasy calm last? The Concord kept repeating that Earth was adjusting well, yet their control grew tighter each day. Humans were allowed to move freely, but only in certain areas. They were free to speak, but only about harmless topics. They were allowed to use their own technology, but only devices approved by the Concord. Everything outside these rules was labeled unstable behavior. Still, humans kept trying to stay calm. Many hoped the Concord would relax once everything stabilized, as they always claimed. People didn't want trouble. They wanted peace. But peace is a delicate thing, and one unexpected moment can break it. It happened on a warm afternoon in a coastal city. The air smelled of salt, and the streets were alive with people finishing their day's work. At the edge of the city stood one of the Concord's tall blue towers, the ones they called coordination centers. Most people avoided looking at it. It felt like a reminder of rules they never agreed to. Near the tower, a large group of humans had gathered for a local event. Art stalls lined the street. Children played with colorful hand fans, and small bands performed music. Even under Concord control, humans still found ways to celebrate life. And the Ithari watched from a distance, quietly scanning and recording everything. Then a deep tremor shook the ground. At first, people thought it was a small earthquake. But when they looked up, they saw cracks forming on the side of the coordination tower. A strange vibration ran through its smooth blue surface. A moment later, the tower made a loud metallic groan. The structure was failing. People screamed and ran, but the tower was huge. A large section tore loose and fell, breaking apart before hitting the ground. Dust filled the air, and part of the street collapsed under the weight. Inside the tower were not just human workers. Many Ithari technicians were stationed there too. In the chaos that followed, something remarkable happened. Humans did not run away. Instead, they rushed toward the dust cloud. Shopkeepers grabbed ladders. Workers pulled away broken metal with bare hands. Children were carried to safety while adults searched for those trapped inside. And among the people they rescued were several Ithari. The humans didn't hesitate. They didn't think about the takeover or the control or the lost freedom. They simply reacted the way humans always had, instinctively helping anyone in danger. 2. Construction workers pulled an Ithari technician from a collapsed support beam. The Ithari looked stunned, confused why humans risked themselves. Their pale face trembled. Their hands shaking. Another group formed a chain to lift broken blocks of material off an Ithari who had fallen from one of the upper platforms. A human offered their own jacket to wrap around the alien's injured arm. Nearby, an older woman guided a panicked young Ithari out of the dust, speaking gently as if calming a scared child. No one asked for thanks. No one asked for reward. People helped because someone needed help. The Concord had been studying humans for months. They had watched them work, talk, and survive hardship. But they had never seen anything like this. Humans rescuing them, risking their own safety, not because they had to, but because it was the right thing to do. This shook the Athari deeply. By the time the dust cleared and emergency teams arrived, dozens of Athari had been saved by human hands. The rescued aliens stared silently at the people around them, trying to understand the strange emotion behind their actions. Gratitude, compassion, selflessness. The Athari had no word that fully matched these ideas. Their society valued order and calmness, not emotional sacrifice. They had trouble understanding why someone would jump into danger for another being. Humans didn't think it was unusual at all. Later that evening, as the sun set behind the ruined tower, a group of Athari officials arrived. They scanned the damage, checked their injured people, and spoke quietly among themselves. Their calm expressions were gone, replaced by something else, fear mixed with confusion. They were afraid of kindness, and they didn't know how to handle that. People watching from rooftops and sidewalks felt something shift in the air. For the first time, the Concord didn't look like calm guardians. They looked unsettled. Humanity had done something unexpected. They had shown compassion to the ones who took their world. At night, many humans went home exhausted, covered in dust, but proud. They didn't know how much this one moment would change things. But the Concord did. 2 days after the tower collapsed, the Concord made an announcement. They called a global address, broadcast to every public screen. Their tone was different, not gentle now, but sharp and heavy. They said the collapse was caused by carelessness. They said humans should not have interfered with restricted structures. They said the rescue efforts were unapproved actions. People stared at the screens, stunned. No one knew how to respond. They had only helped. They had prevented more injuries. And still, the Concord twisted the story. Then something even worse happened. The Concord ordered the removal of several humans who assisted near the wreckage. They called it a corrective action, claiming those humans interfered with Concord operations. The removal wasn't public or violent. The Athari simply escorted them away, speaking politely, promising brief questioning. But people knew what that meant. They had seen others taken for counseling. Some didn't come back for many days. Some returned quiet and numb, like their spirit had been folded shut. The world reacted with heartbreak and anger, in small homes and crowded apartments. Families cried together, confused about why helping would be punished. In marketplaces and workshops, people whispered angrily, feeling something inside them start to crack. The Athari had made their biggest mistake, not the takeover. Not the control, but punishing. Compassion. The Concord claimed the humans were removed because they threatened stability. But everyone knew the truth. The Athari were reacting out of fear. The tower collapse had shown them something they didn't expect. Humanity would remain human, even under pressure, even without freedom. The Concord didn't understand this kind of strength. And when they didn't understand something, they tried to control it. But their attempt to control this moment only created more resistance. That same night, in thousands of hidden places, basements, rooftops, barns, old garages, humans gathered quietly. The underground networks doubled as people who never planned to resist suddenly wanted to help. They weren't angry for themselves. They were angry for the helpers who were taken. Angry that kindness had been treated as danger. In one dimly lit room, a young engineer said, "They think our compassion makes us weak, but that's what makes us strong." Another person nodded. They finally saw something they can't control. Across the ocean, in a small village, an elder spoke softly to a group gathered under lantern light. The Ithari fear what they do not understand. They expect us to break, but we rise instead. Everywhere, the same thought took root. Humanity had something the Concord could never predict. Heart, courage, unity. Then once a human heart is stirred, it does not go quiet again. Meanwhile, inside the Concord's main ship, leaders held urgent meetings. The rescue event troubled them deeply. Their calculations had predicted humans would act selfishly or flee danger. Instead, they showed the opposite behavior. One Ithari leader said, "They risked themselves for us. This is illogical." Another replied, "This behavior cannot be measured. It is unsafe for long-term control." A third whispered, "They might inspire each other. That increases instability." Their voices trembled not from anger, but from fear of the unknown. The Concord began making stricter rules the next morning. More drones in the sky. More restricted areas. More questioning. More corrective measures. But something had already changed. Humans didn't look afraid anymore. They were tired. They were grieving. But they were no longer confused. They knew now that the Concord did not truly understand them. And they understood something else. The Concord's calmness was not strength. It was fear wearing a polite mask. That day, in a crowded street, a message spread quietly from one person to another. A simple sentence, whispered like a spark, "We tried peace." It traveled fast through markets, train stations, small shops, and farms. And with every whisper, those words gained power. People repeated it again and again, until it reached even the quietest corners of the world. We tried peace. It wasn't a threat, it wasn't a call for violence, it was a truth. A beginning. A reminder of who humans were. They had welcomed the Concord with open hearts. They had cooperated. They had trusted. They had even saved them. And the Concord responded with control, fear, and punishment. Humanity would still avoid harm. They didn't want conflict, but now the world understood something very clear. Peace cannot exist when only one side wants it. The Concord had taken the sky, but they had not taken humanity. And soon, they would learn why underestimating humans was their greatest mistake. People had whispered the same quiet sentence across the world. We tried peace. But now, something else began to rise behind those words' steadiness. A different kind of strength. A calmer kind of fire. Nobody wanted harm. Nobody wanted a fight. But nobody wanted to live with silent fear either. Humans simply wanted their world back. Not to punish the Ithari, not to destroy them, but to live with dignity again. In many places, people moved carefully, speaking only indoors or in crowded markets where drone cameras struggled to pick up individual voices. The Concord claimed everything was under control, yet their behavior showed the opposite. They increased patrols near schools, parks, and transport stations. They watched every gathering, no matter how harmless it seemed. But this time, humans did not panic. They didn't shout or protest loudly. They didn't run. They planned not with anger. Not with revenge they planned with patience. Across mountains, across deserts, across oceans, different groups, connected like pieces of a giant invisible puzzle. These were ordinary people. Teachers, mechanics, farmers, software workers, drivers, street vendors. Nobody had been trained for resistance. But humans have always been able to learn fast when pushed into a corner. An older mechanic in a hidden workshop taught young workers how to rewire small devices and block certain types of scanners. A former technician explained how the Concord drones communicated and where their signals were weakest. A group of students in a quiet town created coded messages, disguised inside cooking recipes and poetry, so the Concorde couldn't detect them. People weren't preparing for violence. They were preparing to disrupt control. The goal was simple: make the Concorde uncomfortable. Make them nervous. Make them realize humanity was not helpless. Meanwhile, something interesting happened inside the tallest Concorde ship hovering above the planet. A few Ithari started questioning their own leadership. They had seen the tower collapse reports. They had read logs showing dozens of humans risking their lives to save Ithari. They still didn't fully understand why humans acted that way, but they couldn't deny the truth. Humans were not unstable. They were not dangerous for caring. They were something else entirely, something the Ithari didn't have words for. A feeling that made no sense to them, yet made everything more uncertain. One Ithari observer wrote in its private tablet, "Humans respond with empathy, even when facing suppression. This makes them unpredictable, not because they are violent, but because they refuse to abandon kindness." That observation would later become important, but for now, the Concorde tried to hide their inner confusion. On Earth, the tension deepened when the Concorde made a strange announcement. They declared a new rule forbidding large public gatherings. They said it was for safety. People knew the real reason. They didn't want humans growing closer. Connection makes people strong, and strong people are hard to control. Still, humans stayed calm. Instead of gathering in big crowds, they met in small groups. Instead of shouting in streets, they whispered in kitchens, garages, and quiet backrooms. People helped each other more than ever before, sharing food, tools, information, and encouragement, something the Concorde never understood was happening. Humans were uniting. They had always fought among themselves in the past over borders, beliefs, politics, everything. But now, with a single force controlling all of them, humanity finally saw themselves as one. Different languages, different cultures, but the same heart, the same world, the same goal. One evening, a young musician in a coastal town played a soft tune on a handmade instrument. It wasn't about resistance or anger. It was about longing for a sky that belonged to humans again. People gathered silently around him, listening, even though they weren't allowed to gather in crowds. Nobody walked away. A drone hovered above, watching, but nobody was doing anything wrong. They were simply listening to music, and strangely, the drone didn't issue any warning. It stayed in place, filming quietly. Perhaps even the Ithari, observing from far away, paused to listen. The song spread online later, and people worldwide played it in their homes. The tune became a symbol not of rebellion, but of memory. A memory of freedom. At the same time, underground groups had been preparing something big. Not an attack, not destruction, something smarter. They had discovered a weakness. The Concorde relied heavily on their communication towers. These towers allowed Ithari ships to coordinate across the planet. If the towers went quiet, even briefly, the Ithari would panic. Not because they feared humans, but because they feared losing control. So, humans planned a global blackout. A gentle one. A temporary one. Enough to send a message without causing harm. It took weeks of preparation. People rewired abandoned radio stations. They built small signal blockers using recycled electronics. And they synchronized clocks, writing the time on paper, carving it into wooden boards, whispering it into the ears of runners who carried the plan to remote areas. The world waited. People felt nervous but hopeful. It was the first time humanity had acted as a single heartbeat. No one knew exactly what would happen, but everyone knew why they were doing it. Not for war, but to make the Ithari listen. When the chosen night arrived, the sky looked unusually calm. Even the stars seemed to wait. Across cities, towns, and villages, humans sat quietly, some at kitchen tables, some on rooftops, some by dim lanterns. At the exact second agreed upon. The world turned into a silent orchestra. Every homemade, blocker activated. Every carefully placed disruption device turned on. Every hidden transmitter began sending harmless noise. Just like that, the Concorde's global network went dark for 38 seconds. Only 38 seconds. But to the Ithari, it felt like the world had stopped. Inside their main ship, alarms flashed everywhere. Screens went blank. Commands went unanswered. For a short moment, the Ithari couldn't coordinate. They couldn't see Earth's surface clearly. They couldn't communicate with their own outposts. It wasn't destruction. Nothing broke. No one was hurt. But the Concorde felt something they had not felt in centuries: vulnerability. When the connections returned, the Ithari scrambled to run diagnostics. Instead of finding an explosion, a weapon, or a hack, they found something that scared them even more. The blackout had happened everywhere at once. Billions of humans acting together, calmly, silently, with precision. That terrified the Concorde more than any weapon ever could. The Ithari leadership called an emergency meeting. They spoke in quick, worried tones. Their main concern wasn't the blackout itself. It was the hidden message behind it. Humans had shown they could coordinate on a planetary scale. They had shown intelligence, restraint, and unity. They had shown that despite rules, drones, and supervision, the Concorde still did not truly control the human spirit. And worst of all, they had shown they could disrupt the Ithari without causing any damage. The Concorde didn't know how to respond to that. On Earth, after the blackout ended, people went back to their daily routines. Shops opened. Buses ran. Farmers tended their fields. Streets filled with normal life. The blackout was never spoken of openly. There were no celebrations, no speeches, no crowds. Just quiet confidence spreading like dawn light. People looked at each other differently now. Not with fear, with understanding. Humanity had done something impossible, and done it together. The Concorde tried to pretend they weren't shaken, but their actions revealed the truth. They tightened restrictions, but their drones hovered higher now, as if unsure of the ground below. Their soldiers moved with stiff nervousness. Their broadcasts repeated empty reassurances. Even the Concorde's calm voice sounded less certain. Days later, something unexpected happened. A small group of Ithari approached a group of humans in a mountain village. Their posture was different, not stiff, not superior. Their shoulders were lower, almost tense. One Ithari gently asked, "Why did you rescue us?" The humans glanced at each other, confused. One of them, an elderly farmer with gentle eyes, replied simply, "Because you were in danger." The Ithari didn't understand. They asked again, "But we are your controllers." "You had no obligation." The farmer smiled a little. "That doesn't matter. When someone needs help, we help." The Ithari remained silent for a long moment, trying to make sense of a logic beyond their understanding. They left quietly, but something inside them shifted. Stories of this small conversation spread among Ithari workers quickly. Many began questioning their role on Earth. They had been taught that emotions made societies chaotic, that compassion weakened order. But now they wondered if maybe emotions weren't weakness at all. Maybe they were strength. As the days passed, the world stood on the edge of something new. Humans felt more united than ever. The Ithari felt more unsure than ever. And both sides sensed something approaching. A turning point. Earth had tried peace. Earth had shown mercy. Earth had sent a quiet warning. Now, the Concorde would have to decide what kind of future they wanted. With humans rising stronger each day, the final part of the story, everything that would follow, would depend on what choice the Ithari made next. The world felt strangely calm after the blackout. Not peaceful, just calm, in a way that comes when everyone quietly understands that something big is about to happen. People woke up at their usual times, went to work, cooked, laughed with family, and tried to keep life normal. But underneath everything, there was the same silent question in millions of hearts. What will the Concord do next? They had always presented themselves as balanced, emotionless beings whose decisions were based only on logic. But after the blackout, that mask no longer looked solid. For the first time, the Concord were showing signs of stress. Their broadcasts had small hesitations. Their officers moved more cautiously. Their drones flew in awkward circles, scanning too much. Almost like they were searching for something they couldn't find. Confidence. The Athari had lost it. For days. The Concord leadership locked themselves inside their main ship. Humans saw the giant structure floating above the sky, glowing faintly at night like a silent reminder of who held the power. But inside that glowing metal, the Athari were arguing, trying to understand something that didn't fit into their calculations. Humans. They couldn't predict them. They couldn't measure them. They couldn't control them. Not fully. And now, after witnessing calm unity, the Athari leaders had begun to fear what would come next if they pushed harder. The blackout had been harmless, yet powerful. It showed intelligence. It showed coordination. It showed restraint. But above everything, it showed that humanity had awakened from fear. One Athari leader argued that they should tighten control even further to break the rising human confidence. Another argued that such pressure would only make humans more united, which would make them unpredictable. A third leader simply repeated the same line again and again. They helped us when the tower collapsed. Why would they help us if they hated us? This question settled over the room like a shadow. Meanwhile, on Earth, humans were waiting. They kept preparing not for a fight, but for whatever the Concord decided to do. Some communities stored food. Others built backup shelters underground, not to hide, but to protect their children in case the Concord reacted out of fear. People didn't whisper angrily now. Their voices carried something steadier, something that felt like quiet power, across deserts, forests, cities, islands. Everyone could feel it. The world was holding its breath. Then, on a cloudy morning, something unexpected happened. The Concord shut down their drones, one by one. Across the planet, the drones lowered themselves to the ground. Some landed on rooftops, some on empty roads, some in fields or forests. They made no threatening noises. They didn't flash warnings. They simply powered down, as if falling asleep. People came out of their homes and watched in disbelief. Children touched the smooth metal shells. Adults stared at the sky, half expecting something dramatic to follow. But nothing happened. The world went silent. Then the screens flickered. Every display, big or small, in streets or inside homes, lit up with the pale face of a high-ranking Athari. Their voice was steady, but not cold. Not anymore. People of Earth, the Athari began slowly. We have watched you. We have judged you. And we have been wrong. Every human in every country stopped to listen. We came believing you were a danger to yourselves. We believed your strong emotions made you unstable. We believed our guidance would protect you. We believed control was the best path for peace. A long pause followed, but you have shown us something we did not expect. The Athari leaders, eyes softened in a way that no one had ever seen from them before. When our tower fell, you saved us. Not because you wanted reward, not because you feared punishment. You helped us because it is who you are. People watching the broadcast felt a warmth rising in their chests. Humans knew their own nature, but hearing the Concord admit they misunderstood, it felt like a weight lifting from the sky. The Athari continued. When you sent your global signal, you caused no harm. You did not choose destruction. You chose restraint. You chose wisdom. You showed us unity without aggression. The world waited, breath held tight. We see now that we were afraid. Afraid of what we could not understand. Afraid of your kindness. Afraid of your unpredictability. Afraid of the strength that comes from emotion. But fear is not a reason to take a world. And then came the words no one expected. We will leave Earth. Gasps filled homes and streets. People looked at each other, unsure if they'd heard correctly. The Ithari leader continued, more gently now. We do not wish to return to conflict. We do not wish to become the reason your unity turns into war. We have learned from you, and we wish to leave you in peace. But peace wasn't just about leaving. The question was how the leader took a deep breath, a human-like breath, hesitant and full of mixed feelings. We also understand something else. Many among us wish to stay not as rulers, but as guests, as learners, as friends. People blinked in surprise. Friends, we will not force this. Any Ithari who chooses to remain will do so under your guidance, not ours. They will live by your rules. They will respect your world. In countless places, humans watched silently. Nobody cheered. Nobody shouted. The moment felt too big for loud emotions. It was the kind of moment that sank into the heart slowly, filling it with deep relief. The Ithari leader addressed one final thing to the humans who were taken for questioning during the tower collapse. We apologize. They will be returned to you today. Their voices will be restored. Their dignity will be honored. People cried then, not because of sadness, but because they had carried fear for too long. The broadcast ended, and the sky changed. The Concorde ships, massive, bright, imposing, began rising higher. Their engines glowed softly as they aligned themselves above the atmosphere. Billions of humans watched from windows, fields, rooftops, beaches, and streets. One by one, the ships drifted away from Earth, disappearing into the dark sky like distant stars fading. For the first time in many months, Earth's sky belonged only to Earth again. But not all Ithari left. A smaller group stayed behind, standing awkwardly at the edges of human settlements. They looked anxious, uncertain, almost shy. Humans approached them slowly, not with anger, but with curiosity. Some Ithari bowed politely. Some placed their hands on their hearts. Some simply looked around in quiet amazement. The world felt different. Lighter. Quieter. Free. Over the following days, humans rebuilt what was damaged. Families were reunited. The rescued helpers came home and were welcomed as heroes, not because they fought, but because they helped, cared, and stayed true to themselves. The Ithari who remained learned new things every day. They learned what laughter sounded like, how humans told stories, how they cooked meals together, how they cried openly, how they argued passionately, how they forgave. They learned that emotion wasn't a weakness. It was a kind of strength they had never known. And humans learned something too. They learned that even powerful outsiders could be afraid. They learned that empathy could disarm fear more effectively than force. And they learned that sometimes the simplest actions like rescuing someone who needs help could change the direction of history. One evening, long after the Concorde left, a quiet gathering formed at the same coastal city where the tower had fallen. People placed lanterns along the shoreline and let them drift out to sea. Some lanterns represented peace. Some represented freedom. Some represented forgiveness. Floating lights moved gently across the water, glowing like tiny stars. Ithari guests stood nearby, watching in awe. They had never seen anything so emotional and beautiful, so simple yet so meaningful. A calm breeze blew through the crowd, carrying the sound of soft waves and soft hearts. People didn't celebrate loudly. They didn't need to. They just stood together, united by everything they had survived. Earth had returned to itself, Not through war, not through force, not through fear, but through the one thing humans had always been strongest at. Humanity docked, and somewhere out in the silent universe, as the Concorde fleet traveled home, a message was recorded in their logs, one that would guide their future for centuries to come. We tried to control them, but they taught us instead. The story of Earth's quiet strength would spread across the stars, carried by Ithari voices who had witnessed it with their own eyes, and Earth itself, finally free, would never forget the truth that carried them through the hardest days. We tried peace. And peace worked because we never gave up on being human.